Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about factoring quadratics, which I know is a little new to everyone and therefore a little confusing. The idea behind factoring quadratics is we have a quadratic equation, which means it has a x squared instead of just an x to the power of 1, like normal. And it also means that it's a little trickier to solve. So like if you're trying to solve this equation, let's actually make it an equation for a second, right? And you want to say, hey, what's x? It's a lot, you can't do it the same way you solve linear equations where you just get the x by itself, because there's an x and there's also an x squared. So instead, how we solve linear equations is by factoring and using the zero product property. Well, that's one way. You can also, like later, you'll learn the quadratic formula, which is another way to solve. But factoring is one of the easier ways. If it's possible to factor, just factor. It's easy. So the idea behind factoring is that you're looking at two things, two numbers. The first number is the coefficient of the x. And the second number is the coefficient, or not the coefficient, the constant. Now, what I've been talking about, what you've done before, this is all only the case if the coefficient of the x squared is 1. So that's the only type of factoring that we're looking at, or the trinomial, because tri meaning 3. So there's 3 terms, and the first one, the x squared, just has a coefficient of 1. So we're not gonna, we haven't talked about other cases other than that. So again, we're looking at the coefficient of the x, which is 3, and the coefficient, and the constant, which is 2. The idea is that we want to find two numbers that are going to add to the coefficient of x and multiply to the constant. And I'll go over why in a moment, because I'll go backwards, but that's what we're going to look for. So what I highly suggest most of the time is that you're going to want to look at this number that you want things to multiply to, and you're going to factor it. Now, 2 is an easy one. The only factors are 2 and 1. Fortunately, if we look at those two factors, 2 plus 1 does give us 3. So those are the two factors that we're going to be using. So this one just factors into x plus 2, x plus 3. I mean, x plus 1. That's its factorization. Now, let me go ahead and go over why we factor. The idea of factoring is that it's the opposite or the inverse of multiplying two binomials. So these are both binomials because they both contain two things, right? An x and a constant, an x and a constant. So if you're going to multiply these, there's a couple of things you can do. I use the box method a lot, right? Where we have the x plus 2. Then we have the x plus 1, and we're going to kind of treat this like a Punnett square, right? So go ahead and fill in the inside. X times x gives us x squared, so x times x. And then here we're going to do x times 2. That's just plus 2x. We're going to do x times 1. That's just 1x. And we're going to do 1 times 2. That's just 2. Now, these two boxes right here, this box and this box, are both x coefficient, or both x values, right? So it's just x. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our answer and we're going to combine our like terms. So the x, so we have the x squared plus, and then combine these two. That's 3x plus our last one is 2. So that is what we're doing is we're going backwards. So we want to factor it. We want to see what two things will multiply and create this quadratic. So yeah, let me go ahead and do another one. Let's say we're doing x squared minus 10x. All right, I think I did it correctly. So again, we're going to take a look at the two things here. We want our two numbers to add to negative 10, but multiply to 16. So I'm going to go ahead and factor this. You might say, oh, maybe it's 4 and 4, but 4 and 4 do not add to 10, right? Nope, doesn't work. So it's not 4 and 4. Let's go ahead and erase those ones. Not 4 and 4. So how else can we factor 16? Well, what about 2 and 8? And then, see 2 and 8? 2 plus 8 is positive 10. Can we make this negative 10? Well, yeah, we just have to make both of them negative. Double check, does this still make this a positive 16? Yes, it does, because negative 2 times negative 8 gives us positive 16. 2 negatives make a positive. So I have those little dots everywhere, and I don't like them. And besides, my 8 is ugly, so let's fix that. All right, so negative 2, negative 8. So those are our two factors. We double checked that they add to negative 10. We can just go ahead and write it. X minus 2, X minus 8. Ta-da! All right, and then the other thing with this is talking about the zero product property. So let's say that we actually had an equation. So we had X minus 6, X plus 5 is equal to 0, right? So in this case, we're going to want to do what we did before. We're going to factor this. 5 and 1 are the only factors of 5. Okay, that's not going to add to 6, but if we make them both negative, then it adds to negative 6, and then 2 negatives do become a positive, so we're good. So what we would do is we would then write this as x minus 5, x minus 1, set it equal to 0, and now we're going to use the zero product property. So the zero product property means that if you multiply something by 0, the answer has to be 0. So if you multiply two things together, so we don't know what they are, we just say, hey, a times b is equal to 0, that means that hey, either a has to be 0 or b has to be 0, or both of them have to be 0. So what we are saying here is that with our equation right here, either this x minus 5 has to be 0 or the x minus 1 has to be 0 in order for our equation to be equal to 0, which means that we can set both equations up and get two different possible answers for x. Now notice that we have two possible answers for x, and that's because we have an x squared. The highest exponent of your variable is how many solutions you'll have, as long as you count complex ones. But that's getting a little too complex, so let's, I won't talk about that. So we have x minus 5 is equal to 0. We can solve that very easily. We're just going to use inverse operations and add 5 to both sides, right? So we're getting x is equal to 5. Or we also have the other option of, what if the other one, x minus 1 is equal to 0. Then again, inverse operations, we're going to add 1 to both sides. And this is 0. So we're just going to get our answer of x is equal to 1. Right? Let me go ahead and do one more example. This time I'm going to make it slightly more complicated, like the thing you have on your review assignment. So let's say that's x minus 11x is equal to negative, yes, negative 24. So in this case, notice that we don't have it set equal to 0. That's the first step, is in order to use the zero product property, you have to have it equal to 0 at the end. So we can't go and factor what we have on the left. Right now, we need to first step add 24 to both sides. Now we add 24 off to the left. There's no actual place to put it so that it lines up because there's no constant over here. So just kind of, I don't know, make it hang out somewhere. And then we're going to go ahead and add it on at the end. You don't want to add it to the 11x because this is 11x's. This is just 24 as a constant. It's its own term. Here we have 0. Yay, that is exactly what we wanted. We wanted it equal to 0 so we can use the zero product property. Let's go ahead and factor. Maybe you'd say, oh, 2 and 12, but look, that doesn't work. You can't get those to add up to 11. So what about 4 and 6? Nope, still won't add up to 11. Now I happen to know what it is because I made it up. 3 and 8 is a combination that'll work, but not positive 3 and positive 8, negative 3 and negative 8, right? So we'll go ahead and factor that. Let me go ahead and draw a line for organization's sake. And we'll factor this as x minus 3, x minus 8 is equal to 0. And I'm going to just use some shorthand here. We set x equal to 3 equal to 0 and use inverse operations. We're going to get we set x minus 3 is equal to 0. Use inverse operations, add 3 to both sides, we get x equal to 3. If we set x minus 8 equal to 0, right, we're going to get the other option of, or x could be 8. So that is factoring and using the zero product property to solve quadratics. If you have questions, please do let me know, okay?